Hello, everybody. Welcome to Storytime from the Milledgeville Public Library of Illinois. The story we have for you today comes to us from Vietnam, and it is a story that tells us how things came to be. This is the story of Chu Cuoi, the man in the moon. Once long ago, there was a poor woodcutter named Chu Cuoi. Every day he would go out into the woods and he would gather up the dead wood, and he would cut down the dying trees, and he would gather the wood and he would take it back to his house. He would tie it up in big bundles, and then he would put it on a stick across his shoulders, and he would put a bundle on each end, and he would carry it back to his house that way. It was a lot easier to carry it if you had an ox that you could just put the bundles of sticks over the top of. But oxen are very expensive, and Chu Cuoi did not have enough money to buy one. He was a very poor man. And so he would put the sticks and he would carry them home with him, and then when he would go to the village to sell the wood to everyone who needed it to make their food, he would drag the bundles of sticks behind him in a long line. Well, on this particular day, Chu Cuoi was out in the forest gathering wood, and he heard an odd sound. And when he stopped gathering his wood and stood up and looked around, he saw that just nearby there were 3 tiger cubs rolling around on the ground and playing and pouncing on each other and rolling around and chasing each other around, and they were having so much fun. Their mother was nowhere to be seen, for she had gone off to hunt some food for them. Well, Chu Cuoi looked at those tiger cubs and he thought, if I can catch one of those cubs, I could sell it, and then I would have enough money to buy an ox to help me with my woodcutting. And so he kept very quiet down in the little area where he was sort of hidden from the tiger cubs seeing him. And he kept very quiet, and he just kept watching. And eventually the tiger cubs, chasing each other and rolling around, one of them rolled very close to where Chu Cuoi was laying. And he jumped out very quickly, and he grabbed it by the back of its neck so it couldn't bite him or scratch him. And he started carrying it home with him. Well, as soon as he jumped out and grabbed their brother, the other 2 tiger cubs started whining and crying and whimpering and calling for their mother. Chu Cuoi had started down the road, and he had not gone very far when suddenly he heard a terrible roar. When he turned around, he found that the mother tiger had come back, dropped the dead deer that she had brought back for her cubs to eat. And when she realized that this man was carrying away one of her babies, she roared at him. Well, Chu Cuoi was quite frightened by that, and very quickly he ran to the nearest tree and he climbed up, still keeping hold of that tiger cub. But the thing is, tiger cubs, they do not hold still, especially if you're trying to climb a tree and hold on to one. And so it squirmed and it squirmed and it scratched him a little bit, and it managed to get away. But the problem was, Chu Cuoi was high up in the tree by that time, so when the tiger cub landed on the ground, it landed very hard, and it didn't move. Well, the mother tiger came over and sniffed at her cub, and then she turned and she walked away, and she went over to a little bubbling stream and a very old-looking banyan tree that was standing there, and she picked a few leaves off of the banyan tree, and she chewed on them a little bit. And then she brought them over, and she put those banyan leaves on top of the tiger cub's head. And the tiger cub instantly jumped up and began chasing his brother's tail as if nothing had ever happened. Well, the tiger family, Mama picked up the deer, and they went off to find some place to have their supper that was not quite so infested with humans. And Chu Cuoi sat up in the tree for a little while until he was sure they were gone. And then he came down from the tree, and he went over to the stream, and he looked at that banyan tree. It didn't look any different than any other banyan tree, and it didn't smell any different than any other banyan tree. But he thought it might be something worth investigating. And so he took a couple of leaves off of the banyan tree and he tucked them into his pocket. And he picked up his bundles of sticks and he began to walk home. He figured he would look at those leaves a little more closely when he got home. Well, as he was walking home, Chu Cuoi noticed something in the ditch alongside the road. And when he got closer, he noticed that it was a little dog. Now, the dog was definitely dead. And Chu Cuoi looked at the dog and he felt so bad because he recognized that little dog. It belonged to the son of one of his fellow woodcutters, and he knew that the little boy would be so upset to find that his dog had died. But then Chu Cuoi remembered what the mother tiger had done. And he took a banyan leaf out of his pocket and he chewed on it. And then he took that leaf and he set it on top of the dog's head. And the dog jumped up, wagged his tail, licked Chu Cuoi on the hand, and ran off home as if he had never been hurt or died. Well, Chu Cuoi knew now that those banyan leaves were certainly something special, and so he went straight home. He dropped his load of sticks, he picked up his shovel, and he went back to the jungle. And he carefully, making sure not to damage any of the roots, he dug up that banyan tree and he took it home with him and he planted it in his courtyard, even though he had to destroy his melon patch and his cabbages to get it in there. He put it in because he figured this tree was very important. And he took very good care of it and he watered it and he made sure that it was well treated and that no one ever harmed the tree. Well, after a few months had gone by, it was time for Tet, the New Year's celebration. And everyone always got excited for Tet. It was Chu Cuoi's favorite time of the year. Everyone was very joyful for the New Year. And so he had lots and lots of branches to take, lots of wood to take to the nearby town to sell, because everyone was going to be making great feasts for the new year, so he knew he could sell a lot of wood in the nearby village. Well, he was going into the village. He even had some very pretty blossoming peach blossoms, branches, and some bright yellow hua mai flowers that he had found in the forest, and he was taking them to the town to sell them. He passed some of his friends that he hadn't seen in a while, for they were all going home to the village of their birth for the Tet celebration. He passed women who were clearing all of the grass and the weeds around from the tombs of their ancestors for those who were spirits who would be coming back to their tombs and back to the earth to visit their families during Tet. He waved to all of the children as they were running along the road, being very excited. When he got to the village, he expected that he would find lots of people dressed in their finest clothing and their finest jewelry, and children playing games and singing songs, because that was always what Tet was like. It was so joyful. But when he arrived in the town, he found that that was not what was happening. In fact, the town was quite silent. There were lots of decorations up for Tet, and people hanging banners for good luck. But it was not a very joyful town. In fact, it was quite a quiet town, and people seemed a bit sad. So as Chu Cuoi was going through the town, he found an old man hanging good luck banners in front of his house, and he went to him and said, "Excuse me, honorable uncle, why is everyone so sad in this most joyful time?" And the man said, "Well, you know, there is the Lord who lives on the other side of the mountain, and he owns much of the land in this area. He has a most beautiful and gentle daughter, Nguye Tien. And Nguye Tien, she is always wandering about the countryside, planting flowers, and she is such a gentle creature, and everyone loves her." And Chu Cuoi said, "Yes, I have seen her from a distance when she was planting flowers. I have heard that she is quite beautiful and very gentle." "Yes, as she is," said the old man, and he said, "but the problem is, she is very, very sick. For many days now, she has not woken up. She just sleeps and sleeps and sleeps. And although her father owns so much land and has so much gold and jewels, none of those will help him to save his daughter. Nothing that he spends can bring a cure for her. And they do not think that she will live through Tet. And so everyone is sad. Well, ever since Chu Cuoi had moved that banyan tree to his yard, he had kept several leaves from the tree in his pockets, just in case he would run across an injured animal or a friend who had gotten hurt. And he had found that all of the little cuts and bruises that he got from cutting his wood, the banyan leaves helped with those too. And so Chu Cuoi immediately put down his sticks and his flowers, and he set out for the great Lord's palace on the other side of the mountain. He walked all day and all night, and he finally arrived at the great Lord's palace. But when he did, Chu Cuoi was still in his woodcutting clothes. They were not very nice looking. They were rather tattered and worn. And he was so dusty from walking all day and all night that the guards in the palace would not let him in. It did not matter how many times Chu Cuoi tried to explain to them that he could cure the Lord's daughter. They did not believe him, and they wanted him to go away. And finally, one of them said, "Go away, beggar, stop bothering us." And he pushed Chu Cuoi, and Chu Cuoi lost his balance and tumbled down the steps, and he cut his foot. Well, his foot was laying there bleeding, and Chu Cuoi reached into his pocket. He took out one of those banyan leaves, and he chewed on it, and then he put it on top of the cut on his foot. Instantly, the blood stopped flowing, and the cut began to heal over, and just a few moments later, his foot looked as though nothing had ever happened. The guards, who had been watching all of this, looked at each other and looked at Chu Cuoi. And then they rushed down the stairs and they picked him up and they dragged him into the palace. They took him to the Lord and they explained to him what had happened. And then the Lord took Chu Cuoi to his daughter's chambers. Nguyen Tian was indeed very beautiful as she lay there on the bed, very pale. She did not look like she was breathing very much at all. Chu Cuoi took several of the banyan leaves out of his pockets, the small ones, and he broke them into little pieces, and he carefully put them into the Lord's daughter's mouth. After just a few minutes of waiting, the color began to creep back into her face, and she began to breathe more deeply and more easily, and just a few moments later, she opened her eyes, and she smiled at her father who was standing there. And he was so happy to see her recovering again that he grabbed Chu Cuoi and he gave him a great big hug and he said, "Woodcutter, you have saved my daughter. And for this, I give you her hand in marriage and I shall give you some of my richest lands." And he ordered his servants to give Chu Cuoi a bag of gold so that he could go home and build a fitting house for his new bride. And so Chu Cuoi took the bag of gold and he went home and he built a beautiful house right where his old hut used to stand with the banyan tree right in the courtyard. And when the house was completed, he went back to the Lord's house and he married Nguyen Tian and he brought her back to the house with him to live. Now, Nguyen Tian very much liked to plant flowers. She liked making everything beautiful with flowers. And so she asked her husband if she could plant some flowers around their house. And he said most certainly she could, anywhere she liked, except right around the roots of the banyan tree. "Do not disturb the roots of the banyan tree," he said, "or something terrible will happen." Well, Nguyen Tian was happy to obey her husband's instructions, and so she began planting flowers all over the house, all around the house, out in the gardens, out on the hills, everywhere around the house. Within just a few months was covered with all kinds of flowers. And then one day, Nguyen Tian had a friend visit, and her friend brought her some tubers from some dahlia plants. And Nguyen Tian wanted to plant those beautiful flowers, but she looked around and she found that there was nowhere left to plant them, except right around the roots of the banyan tree. Now, she would have asked her husband what to do, but you see, Chu Cuoi, well, he had enough money now that he could buy anything he needed, and he didn't have to work, and he had a very nice house and a beautiful and gentle wife. So he had everything he needed, except that, well, he had been a woodcutter for so long that he had gotten used to wandering through the forest and watching the animals play and seeing the beauty of nature and enjoying the quiet. And he wasn't used to having other people around the house all the time. And so frequently, pretty much every day, he would go out and wander about the jungle with his flute and play little tunes and watch the animals playing and see all the beauties of nature. And so the day when Nguyen Tian wanted to plant these dahlia tubers, Chu Cuoi was off in the jungle, wandering about and playing his flute. Excuse me. While he was out there wandering, Nguyen Tian decided that if she was very careful, she could plant the dahlias right in front of the banyan tree, and she would not disturb the roots. And so she went and she got a little shovel, and she started to dig, and she was being very careful. But sometimes when you're using something, a tool that's kind of big like a shovel, it doesn't always do what you want it to do. And so the shovel slipped, and it cut one of the roots of the banyan tree right in half. And the banyan tree groaned as though someone had stabbed it, as though it were in pain. And Nguyen Tian jumped back and screamed, and she doesn't stop screaming, for the tree groaned again, and then it began to move and to shake from side to side, and it began to pull up its roots from deep in the ground. And Nguyen Tian was very scared. She had never seen a tree do anything like this. And so she screamed and screamed and screamed. And of course, Chu Cuoi in the jungle could hear her screaming. And he knew that was his wife's voice. And so he came running as fast as he could to see what was wrong. Well, as soon as he ran into the courtyard, what he saw was the last root of the banyan tree being pulled out of the ground. And Chu Cuoi ran over, and he grabbed a hold of the root, and he tried to pull the banyan tree back, tried to get it to come back to the ground and come back and stay in the ground here. But the banyan tree was very, very strong, and it began to climb up into the sky. And Chu Cuoi was just clinging on to the root because now he was so high up that his house was very small. And then he was high enough up that he could see the nearby village and then the town, and they were just little clusters of lights. And he was very scared now. He could not let go now. And so he clung to the banyan tree's root as the banyan tree climbed up into the sky, past the stars, and walked up and planted itself with all of its roots weaving, sinking down into the soft yellow moon dust on the moon. And to this day, if on a very clear night you look up at the sky, you will see up there on the moon Chu Cuoi sitting underneath the banyan tree playing his flute as he looks down at the earth and wonders how on earth he is going to get back down to his home. And that is the story of Chu Cuoi, the man in the moon, as it comes to us from Vietnam. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll come back and join us again next Wednesday at 3 p.m. Central Time. We will have another story for you from somewhere around the world, coming to you live from the Milledgeville Public Library of Illinois. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.